Hey friends, it's Simon Hurley and welcome to another video. When we launched Stellar Inks and we announced that the Simon Hurley ink pads were going to be slowly retiring, I always wanted there to be a way for the fans of the Simon Hurley felt ink pads to be able to keep their collection going. Because we're launching new colors in the Stellar inks that aren't going to be available in the Simon Hurley pads. But I still love these pads so much, and I know that lots of you guys do too, because there's really a time and place for felt and foam ink pads, and it's kind of just a personal preference. So today's exciting for those people because we are launching a Simon Hurley DIY ink pad. And this is a felt surface that's an empty ink pad that you can re-ink with some of the new Stellar ink colors to make sure you get a complete color collection. Now there's also older colors of Simon Hurley Create inks that we're going to end up retiring and that aren't going to be transferred into the Stellar ink line. So naturally, we're launching a brand new DIY Stellar ink pad, and inside of this one is an empty foam surface. So you're going to be able to take your older Simon Hurley Create reinkers that we aren't bringing into the Stellar ink line and re-ink them into the Stellar inks so you can also get a full collection of the Simon Hurley inks. And what's super cool about both of these pads too is you can use them for more than just that. You can actually create your own custom blends of ombre colors and be really creative with it too, which I'll show you later in today's video. Both of these ink pads are available now, and I'll have them linked down below as well as everything I use in today's video, and using those links helps support me, so I really appreciate it. Now without further ado, let's get into it. Alright, so let me start off by showing you how to fill up the Simon Hurley DIY felt ink pad. So this is that same felt surface that you know and love. This material is super durable, so one of my favorite things about the Simon Hurley inks is you can really take it direct to cardstock and be pretty rough with the ink pad with mixed media techniques and not have to worry about it at all. For this one, I'll bring in my reinkers. I'm going to go in with High Tide from the Stellar ink line because this is one of those new colors that aren't in the Simon Hurley ink pads. So by re-inking it into the DIY ink pad, we can bring this color into the felt pads. And I know I'm going to get questions about this, so this reinker storage is just kind of a nice sturdy plastic storage, and it really fits the reinkers super nicely. Keeps them all separated in their little slot, and it makes it easy to find the colors and keep them nice and organized. I'll have it linked down below in case you guys want to check it out. So refilling the Simon Hurley DIY felt pads is pretty easy. You just take your cap off your reinker, and you'll just go in gently and go back and forth and kind of flood the ink pad with this reinker color. And like I said, this is that really durable like linen felt material, so you can be pretty rough with the reinker nib and you're not going to really do any damage with it, so you don't have to worry too much about that. It really takes that reinker super well and sinks right into the pad. I usually go back and forth about 2 to 3 times to make sure that this ink pad is nice and full of ink. So just do these zigzags back and forth about 2 to 3 times. And then this is just an extra step to make sure the ink is nice and dispersed in your pad. I like to go in with the Simon Hurley scraper from the Paste tool set and just kind of push that ink back and forth throughout the pad with the scraper tool. Like I said, you don't have to worry about doing too much damage. I go in here pretty firm with this just to push that ink around and make sure it's evenly distributed throughout the ink pad. Otherwise, the ink kind of just sits in the places where you put it in those zigzags. All right, then to index your ink pad to make sure you know what's inside, all you're gonna do is take this ink pad, flip it over, and just ink up the lid super quickly and easily. The special part about these stickers on the lids is they're uncoated, so they take the ink really easily. So you can just swipe it across the surface, give it a couple of seconds to dry, and then once it's kind of sunk in there, you can lightly tap off some of that excess ink that's still sitting on the surface, and you've really nicely colored in the top of your ink pad. And then there's a little label down here that says create your own blend, and it's nice and open for you to write what color it is. So I'm just gonna write down High Tide. And there we go. We have our own High Tide ink pad in the Simon Hurley felt material. How cool is that? So like I said, if you're a collector of the Simon Hurley ink pads, you still love that felt and you want to keep collecting the new colors in this, the DIY ink pads are going to be your best friend because you can create your own colors with the new Stellar inks and bring them back to the Simon Hurley line. Alright, then let's move into re-inking the DIY Stellar ink pad. So this is that nice squishy foam surface, and this one's a little bit different when re-inking it. So let's go in here with a re-inker. I think I'm going to choose Triple Berry, which is a nice like berry purple color, and we should have information very soon on which colors from the Simon Hurley line are going to end up being retired. That way you can get your hands on those reinkers if you're collecting the new ink pads and you want to refill some Stellar ink pads with some of the old reinkers, or if you have the older ink pads and you just want those reinkers to make sure you can keep reinking that ink pad for the life of the pad. So I'm just going in here with that Triple Berry reinker, and you want to be kind of careful with the tip of this reinker because it's a little sharp, so you don't want to be nearly as rough as you were with the Simon Hurley pads. I tend to just kind of hover over the surface as I'm adding the ink down onto there and go back and forth really gently to re-ink this pad with color. Now, something you'll notice about the Stellar ink pads is the ink doesn't quite sink in right away. It's really just sitting on top of the surface there. So in order to help it right at the beginning here, I like to go in with the scraper tool. Again, I'm going very light with the scraper tool from the Paste tool set, and I'm just going to lightly kind of help press that ink into the surface. Again, not roughly pressing down, just very lightly on top of the surface here, and it just kind of helps encourage the ink to sink into that ink pad a little bit more. You'll see it's really sitting on the top there, so you just want to lightly encourage it to go into that ink pad surface. All right, so once it's all in, you can then go in for a second pass. And really on this pass, it's gonna sink in a lot easier because there's already moisture and ink inside of this pad. It doesn't resist it like the second time around. So you really only need to do that the first time. And then of course you can go in and use this to just kind of even out the ink and smooth it over. Again, not roughly pressing down, just very lightly on the surface. And then once you want to clean this off, just go in with a little bit of water and it'll clean off really easily because the inks are water reactive. So like I said, a little bit of a different process where you kind of have to help the ink go into the surface, but then your ink pad is nice and full of that color. And then again, to index the top, you can take that ink and just swipe it across to color that Stellar ink label right in. And then again, give it a couple of seconds to kind of dry a little bit, and then I'll go in and blot off any of the excess ink from the surface. And there it colors it in really nicely. And then again, I can go into the create your own blend label and write down triple berry. This is a great way to bring over some of the older colors into the new Stellar ink foam pads if the Stellar inks are the collection that you have. All right, then let's test out these ink pads. So I'm gonna go in using the Watercolor Flowers stamp set because this one has nice solid rose images to test them out. And then we'll go right in with our ink pads. So starting off with a little bit of the High Tide, I'm gonna go in here and ink this up. With the Simon Hurley Create inks, you just wanna use a little bit more pressure as you're tapping to get that ink out of the surface. And then we'll stamp that right down onto the stark white cardstock, lift it off, and check out that impression. You get a really beautiful stamped impression with that. So as you guys can see, the Simon Hurley ink pads are still really great at stamping. I think they only really become a little bit spotty at stamping once you don't re-ink them for a while or they start to get a little bit dry. So definitely just keep your ink pads re-inked and you'll still have great results with stamping. Like I said, these ink pads really still have their time and place because they're so durable with that ink pad surface. So they're great for like swiping on the surface and doing some really fun mixed media techniques with them. That's why I love this ink pad surface so much. And so many of you guys still love it too, and that's why we wanted to continue supporting it with this DIY ink pad so you can create your own colors. Then let's go in with the Triple Berry Stellar ink pad and go in and stamp this down. Okay, I'm already noticing there's a little bit too much ink inside of this pad. So to correct that with the Stellar ink pads, you just want to go in and kind of stamp it off on your surface just like this. You can do it like 2 different times just to get rid of some of that excess ink. This kind of creates your own cardstock, so instead of fully wasting this, you can like die cut some things out of this too. Then let's clean off our stamp and try again. So this is what's important when you're creating your own ink pads, to just test it out right away to see how it stamps. That way you can remove color or add color if needed. Let's see, it still looks a little bit juicy, but we'll see how it stamps. All right, that stamped pretty well. I think it's a little too juicy for my liking still. It filled in some areas that should have a little bit more open space. So again, we'll just like stamp it one more time off to the side, and then we'll go back in and ink this up. You can see that's already a little bit better. There's less pooling on top of the stamp, and then we can stamp it down, and way better. Okay, check that out. It's stamped beautifully now. So you just gotta make sure there's kind of the accurate amount of ink in there. You probably wanna go in with a little bit less ink into your DIY Stellar ink pads at first. But like I said, it's pretty easy to test them out and take out any ink if needed or add more. So you can always start out with less and then test it out and add more if you need. Now, what I think is so fun and special about these ink pads is you can also go in and create your own blends of colors that are super unique and that you couldn't do with just a regular ink pad. So let's go in here with the Simon Hurley Create Felt Surface, and I'm going to create a rainbow ink pad. Here you can use the Stellar inks or the Simon Hurley Create Reinkers. I'm going to use Prom Queen, Shooting Star, and Clear Skies. These 3 colors together will create a rainbow blend because the pink and the yellow overlapped will create an orange, and the blue and the yellow overlapped will create a nice green color. So I'm gonna start off with the lightest color in the center of the pad just to make sure that I have everything lined up nicely. So starting off with Shooting Star, I'm just going to apply that reinker right down in the center of this ink pad, making a nice stripe of color. And again, you can do this in the Simon Hurley or the Stellar ink pads, depending on what material you want to use for this. Then I'm gonna go in with my Prom Queen reinker, and I'm gonna start at the top of the ink pad with a nice line of ink, and I'll slowly bring that down, overlapping it just slightly with that yellow color. Now, it will bleed a little bit into the other colors, so you don't need to really overlap it too much, but I do overlap it just a little bit to get a nice blend of color there, because when we overlap those, it'll create a nice orange. But like I said, it'll kind of naturally bleed just a little bit, so do less than you think, and it'll probably bleed into each other more than you would think. And then for the bottom of the pad, we'll go in using Clear Skies, and just add a line at the bottom, and slowly work my way up into that yellow color. And just go back and forth and put a couple lines of that ink to make sure it's nice and full. All right, that is looking great. Then we can go in onto the top of the ink pad and create our rainbow blend of color by just swiping it across the surface, and that's going to color that in beautifully. You can see that gorgeous rainbow blend that we're getting there. And then again, we'll give that a couple of seconds to sit in and sink into the surface before we blot it off. And then we can write rainbow on the top of our pad. And this is so fun because this is totally something you wouldn't be able to do with a normal ink pad. And then you can also go onto the back of the pad and just add what colors you used. That way you know what to re-ink it with in the future, and you know what's inside of this ink pad. All right, so let me show you just how beautifully this stamps. So let's stamp down this layered balloon from the birthday party stamp set. So starting off, let me just show you how great the Black Widow Stellar ink stamps out. So let's open this up. And with this, you just want to do really light taps on the surface to make sure that it's nice and inked, but not over ink it. Then we'll go in onto our stark white cardstock and stamp it down. Perfect. So you can see it gives a nice crisp, fine line, jet black image. I went to an event recently and tons of people were telling me this is their new go-to black ink just because of how crisp it stamps and how nice and dark the black is, which is a major compliment. We worked really hard on picking the perfect black color for Black Widow. Then I'm going to go in with my rainbow ink pad in the Simon Hurley ink pad, and I'm going to ink this up. So again, lots of pressure on the surface there as we ink it, and you'll get that really great rainbow blend across the balloons. And we'll line it up over top of the image and stamp it into place beautifully. And check out how amazing that stamped. And what's so cool about this is, like I said, with those 3 different colors, you get a beautiful orange in between there and a green, and the blend is just immaculate. You totally couldn't get this smooth of a blend by just kind of using all 3 of those colors separately. By having them all in the same pad and kind of merging together like that, you get such a beautiful look. And it doesn't merge together too much. Like I said, it bleeds a little bit and it'll kind of go a little bit into each other as you use it. You just want to make sure to store the pad flat and not on its side, and that will help the colors not bleed and merge all together. Now I also want to make a note that you just want to make sure that when you're inking it, you kind of stay in almost the same place. You can shimmy up and down just slightly, but you don't want to kind of move it all about the pad because then you'll merge and blend the colors together too much. But it really does give such a beautiful and unique stamped effect. I love it. Now I wanted to also show you with this Brushstrokes background stamp. You're probably wondering how we're going to do this because the ink pad is so small compared to this large background. So let me show you how to do it. What you're going to do is take your ink pad and we're going to ink it up across the surface like this. So like I said, you could do little shimmies up and down slightly, but don't go too crazy with your ink pad. Like you don't want to keep moving down as you ink it up. What you want to do then is rotate your ink pad so now the blue line is facing where that blue line was, and you can kind of overlap it there. So now the rainbow is going in the opposite direction, but it's still lined up so that the blue is on top of that blue area. Then again, you're going to flip it again. So now the red line is going to be on top of this red line. So you're just flipping it as you're stamping to make sure you're not going to contaminate the colors, and then you get a nice rainbow cross. Then I'm going to spray it down with just a little bit of water to get kind of a watercolor effect on these brush strokes, and place down a piece of Simon Hurley stark white cardstock, and that stamps it down absolutely beautifully. So with that little bit of spray, you get more of kind of a watercolored and speckled effect on these brush strokes, and I think it looks so cool. But like I said, that blend is still amazing. You get that orange and that green in between there, and it blends beautifully. And I'm glad I was able to show you it on a bigger stamp too, so you know how you can flip and rotate your ink pad to not contaminate the colors and still get a beautiful blend. All right, now let's create a sort of winter blend that I'm going to be using all of the holidays. And I'm going to use one of the Stellar ink pad bases to do it with that nice foam pad. So let's start off by going in with a little bit of High Tide. And we're going to start by working this color into the top of the ink pad. Now, if you also want another way to kind of work it into the pad, you can use this tip to slightly press it in, but just make sure to use the side of the tip and go really lightly to get that ink sort of started into the pad. Just know you have to be really careful with it because you are kind of risking a little bit of damage to this. You want to be very careful with this foam ink pad. So like I said, the best way to do it is going in with that scraper tool and just kind of lightly pushing it across the surface like this. You just can't get as detailed with the scraper tool, so I did want to kind of share that if you use the side of the tip and go so lightly, you can get into more detailed areas and kind of get that ink worked into the pad a little bit. Next, we'll go in with Clear Skies in the Stellar Ink Reinker, and I'm going to, again, go in that middle area of the pad, add that color nicely down onto the surface, and then again, go in with that scraper and just follow down on the line with that color. All right, we got probably a little more ink than we wanted to down there, but then we'll work our way into Midnight Snack, and that's gonna cover it up anyway since it's a really nice, dark, rich, vibrant color. So we'll just go in here at the bottom and work in a little bit of that Midnight Snack color. All right, and then same thing, once we're done, we're going to index our ink pad by just swiping it across the top of the surface. And oh my gosh, I'm already loving that color blend that we got going on there. And we'll give it a couple seconds to sit on top of the surface. And then once it's dried in there a bit, we can go in and dab off any of the excess ink that's on top of the pad. You know, I said winter earlier, but I'm thinking coastal for this ink pad because it's got that like greenish blue at the top. So let's write oceanic. That's the name of my blend, and then we're gonna flip it over to the back and write abbreviations for the names so that I know what colors are inside of here. That step is super important. That way when you go to re-ink this ink pad, you know exactly what's inside. And I know just what stamp I wanna try this out with. I'm gonna go in using the Saltwater Peel Apart Background stamp, and we'll go in with our DIY Stellar ink, and again, just really light taps when you're using the Stellar ink, because you don't want too much ink on the surface, but we'll go and do one stripe, and then again, we'll rotate the stamp so that Midnight Snack is on top of the Midnight Snack area, and ink it up, and then rotate it again so that High Tide is touching where High Tide was last. All right, then we'll drop our cardstock right into that ink and go into our pressure tool just to make sure we get an even pressure all over the surface of the background. Lift this off, and oh my gosh, check out that stamping. That is what's really incredible about the foam for that Stellar ink pad. It releases ink beautifully. So you might be sacrificing the fact that you have to be lighter handed and you can't be as rough with different mixed media techniques, but I gotta tell you, the stamping is A1 with these Stellar ink pads. That foam is incredible. You wouldn't think that the same ink formula in two different surfaces would create that much of a difference, but it totally, totally does. I'm obsessed with this, wow. All right, this is really addicting. At some point, somebody's gotta stop me. Like, I wanna order a million more of these ink pads and keep doing color blends because it is so much fun. I gotta do one more of these DIY Stellar ink pads. So let's go in and do like a purple to pink blend. So I'll do 100% Juice, Love Struck, and then at the top, maybe we'll do Prom Queen. I think that'll turn out pretty cool. So starting off, let's ink up Prom Queen at the top of that foam pad. And then I'll go into a little bit of Love Struck, and we'll add that right down into the center of the pad. And I am getting good at kind of using the side of this Reinker just super lightly and just kind of getting some of that ink worked in. Because like I said, with these detailed blends, it's harder to go in with that scraper tool, but again, do it with a ton of care. You want to be really careful not to tear this foam material. And then at the bottom, we're going to do a little bit of 100% Juice, which is that gorgeous purple color, and fill the rest of the ink pad with this color. Then let's index this blend. I'm so excited to see what it looks like. We'll swipe it right down on top of the Stellar ink lid, and that is incredible. Wow. I love those three colors together, and that's something that I usually wouldn't think of doing, but it's gorgeous. And I just need to stamp this down using the Under the Sea stamp set. I think this octopus would be gorgeous with that color blend. All right, so we'll just go into our ink pad, and it pretty much fits right on top of the surface there. So we'll just go in and ink that up. I'm so excited. Oh my gosh, that is gorgeous. The blend is absolutely stunning, but I noticed that it's filling in too many of the details. So again, we might have over inked it just a little bit. It's pretty easy to do with these foam pads. So just take out a little bit of that ink, and then let's try that one more time. We'll ink that up beautifully. That looks like it's gonna stamp perfectly now. And then we'll stamp it right down. And there we go. Check out just how gorgeous that octopus stamped. That color blend is so, so stunning. All right, now let's put a card together and finish everything off. So we'll go into the coordinating dies and pick out the octopus die, line it up with our image with an even white border all the way around, and tape it down with our mint tape to hold it in place while we run it through our die cutting machine. And then I'll throw this in my little black platinum Scout to die cut it out super easily. Run it right through. This is by far my favorite little machine for easy die cutting. It's super easy to just have on my desk or right next to me at all times and cut out images. And it can cut out images that are pretty big, unlike other small die cutting machines. It's got like a 3.5-inch footprint, which is quite large for little machines like this. All right, then we'll pop this guy out, and it also cuts out little in-between areas in between the octopus's legs, which make having those coordinated dies not only time-saving, but really great for those intricate details. Now for this, I want to give it just a little bit of shine, so I'm going to go in using Solar Spray in the color Pity Party. You want to make sure to shake it because there's that mica at the bottom. You don't want to spray it because it'll clog the sprayer if you spray it with that at the bottom. So give it a good shake to mix it all around. And then when I go to spray something that's stamped and I don't want to cover up or dull the ink, I just go from a little bit of a higher distance and we'll mist that down across the surface. Very lightly and give it a couple of mists. And that just adds the slightest shine and sparkle to the image without covering anything up. That's what I love so much about the solar sprays, is that they're clear when you're looking straight on, but then once you tilt it in the light, you get that colored shine. So you can see that like pinkish lavender shine that's on the surface. It's a nice surprise when you see it. All right, then I want a little matting around the background that has a color. So since I used Midnight Snack in the actual project, I'm gonna take my Midnight Snack Stellar ink pad and just really lightly swipe this across the side of the cardstock. Keeping it super light, just barely even touching the cardstock, and then you get your own DIY colored cardstock super easily. Again, that's one of the perks of the Stellar inks because it releases ink so well, and then we'll put this right on top of there and check out how amazing that matte looks, and it perfectly matches the Midnight Snack ink that's on there. Then I'm gonna bring in one of the Simon Hurley pre-cut and scored card bases. This is one of the side folding ones. So all you need to do is fold it over and give it a nice crease. Having these already done saves me tons of time. And then we'll go in and adhere our background right down onto the card base. And then I'll use the sentiment that says, "You octopi my thoughts." And I'm gonna stamp that down using some Midnight Snack. I've actually been using more color for my stamping, and especially sentiment stamping lately, because of the Stellar inks. They just stamp such a crisp image down and really nice and bold, even with sentiments. So I've been loving using colored inks for sentiments now too, to really match the project. And then you guys know me, I like to fussy cut around my sentiment using my Fiskars Spring Assist scissors. I just find this gives it a nice finished look and you're able to see the background a little bit more rather than leaving it on a larger rectangle cardstock. And these Fiskars Spring Assist scissors are nice because they spring back out at you so your hands don't get tired. And I also find I get a really nice smooth cut with them as well. All right, then I'll add the octopus down front and center on some foam tape and adhere the sentiment down right below it. And there's a closer look at our finished card. I love how it turned out using our brand new DIY ink pads to create those ombre color blends. The blends are just so seamless and gorgeous with those blues together and the pink going into the purple. You really couldn't get these effects any other way. And then of course, that little bit of solar spray really brings this card to life and gives it a little shine when you tilt it in the light. I love it. All right, you guys, thank you so much for joining me for today's video for the announcement of the new DIY ink pads in both the Simon Hurley felt and also the new Stellar foam. This was really intended as a way to still support the felt so you guys can take some of the new Stellar ink colors and bring them down into the felt if that's what you love. And then same thing, vice versa. If you're just getting into the Stellar ink pads, you're gonna wanna grab some Reinkers from the Simon Hurley line that are maybe retiring and bring them into the Stellar ink pads. And it's a complete and total bonus that you can create your own custom pads from this too, to have tons of fun creating your own ombre blends like we were doing in today's video. Leave me a comment down below letting me know which ink pad was your favorite that I created today. I would love to chat with you guys down there. And also down there, I'll have linked to the brand new ink pads as well as all of the stamps and stuff that I used in today's video. And using those links helps support me, so I really appreciate it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys soon for another card making and crafting video. Have a great day. Bye.